We are the co-founders of Dipper.
Dipper is a technology platform that guides professionals of color to a better workplace, one review at a time.
Dipper is your safe space. It is the time for you to share your voice with a community that you are a part of. Visit us and join today at ourdipper.com.
Welcome to the virtual launch of ourdipper.com. We have a fun topic today, but first I want to share more about Dipper, a tech platform for all people of color, Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous professionals of all levels, including C-suite, to rate and review their workplaces. Members have profiles and can access the inside scoop on which companies to join, and guess what? Companies that you need to stay away from. Members can also engage with other members on Dipper's newsfeed. So today our topic is, are you ready? Drunk yoga. How many of y'all have heard about drunk yoga? Don't worry if you haven't. We're going to get into it in just a second. Cultivating joy through fun, right? So let me start by introducing our guest, Eli Walker. Eli is the founder, CEO, and author of the internationally acclaimed Drunk Yoga, as well as a professional speaker, Forbes contributor, and solo performance artist who curates interactive gatherings that spark health and happiness through radical belonging. Her work has been featured in the International Business Times, Refinery 29, New York Post, Glamour, Elle, Shape, LA Times, People TV, and more. She's everywhere, okay? As a yoga facilitator and leadership consultant, she helps individuals get out of their heads so they can more deeply connect to their peers and communities by breaking down the fourth wall, or conventional rules that keep us feeling isolated. In Eli's training, she provokes group discovery and creativity through the power of play and teaches us the art of getting over ourselves. How many of us are in our own way? That really spoke to me, right? So join me in welcoming the multi-talented founder of Drunk Yoga, Eli Walker. We love to start off by learning more about your journey. So Eli, what motivated you to create spaces that are joyful in nature?
Well, first of all, hi, Netta. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such a pleasure. To answer your question, a few years ago, I saw a major problem with the way wellness and yoga specifically were being taught in conventional spaces, and it reminded me a lot of what I already know about theater.
Right.
My background is in acting, and I went to NYU's Tisch School of the Arts for performance, actually. And after I graduated and became a yoga teacher, and I was teaching yoga in conventional settings like studios and gyms, the level of visceral discontent and isolation I could feel among my overworked New York City students was very obvious. And any fitness instructor out there today knows this story. You walk into a classroom full of students sitting on their mats, all lined up in a row, facing one direction, generally looking at themselves in a mirror, and they're not talking to each other. And as the teacher, I say, "Hi, everyone, how you doing?" And nobody answers.
And we all have that awkward silence, yeah.
Yeah, you hear crickets. And I might follow up with, "All right, is there anything specific I can help you work on today? Hips, shoulders?" And then they just stare at you. Sometimes they even look annoyed because what's happening is I'm doing something socially incorrect, right? I'm breaking down what we call in theater the fourth wall, as you mentioned in my bio. That imaginary social contract that we all agree upon that says, for example, when we go see a Shakespeare play, right, the actors on the stage are in another world entirely than the audience, and we do not communicate with them. And I believe, well, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's like they're over there, we're over here, we don't talk about it, but we just don't communicate. It's just the way it is.
Right.
And I believe it's the same fourth wall in yoga classes that tells us that despite the fact that we're all having this vulnerable experience together, 3 inches away from one another, opening ourselves up to ourselves, we cannot talk to each other, we cannot look at each other, and the teacher exists for one purpose only, to tell me what to do with my body and then go home.
Right.
Drove me nuts. And this unspoken, outdated, somewhat patriarchal agreement that says the teacher or facilitator is on one side of the wall and the students in the audience are on the other And no matter how many times, Netta, I would try to playfully break through with music or jokes or other theatrical devices so that we could all experience a deeper connection through safety and real acknowledgement of radical presence, there was still so much reluctance from my students to break the rules in traditional spaces. So when I founded Drunk Yoga, I appreciated the importance of leading our interactive yoga classes in unconventional spaces with integrity. Otherwise, I knew that trying to turn yoga into this entertainment experience, right, wouldn't work. So I pioneered drunk yoga outside of fitness studios, in bars or hotels or offices, for example, in spaces that are already social. So we feel safer to get over ourselves and be silly and try something new. And what I discovered is that when we finally give ourselves permission to extend ourselves beyond our reflections in the mirror, so to speak, and reach through the fourth wall, break the rules that keep us feeling comfortable but isolated, we open up a whole new, happier world for sustainable belonging through the currency of connection.
Wow. Yeah. And a little drink will do it too.
Wine never hurts anything.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think, I even talk to my friends about this. Oftentimes when people are working out, right? And even with yoga, you're always watching, right? Like who's looking at me? Who's paying attention to me doing this, right? Especially for folks that are just trying this for the first time, right? Yoga for the first time. Am I doing this position correctly? What are people going to say if I don't? So a little bit of liquid courage goes a long way. And I love that you came up with this idea of let's drink. Let's have a drink. Let's relax. Let's break down this fourth wall. Let's be vulnerable in this moment. And really just take that moment in and do what we love to do, which is yoga. And I think that is brilliant. That's awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate the support. I mean, of course, we've been around for about 4 years now, and the further along we get in the company, the more evident it is that it is not, in fact, about the wine. It's the fact that I've restructured where and how and why we do yoga. As a yoga teacher, I hear that Netta all the time of like, well, I would do yoga, but I'm afraid I'm going to look dumb, or I can't lift my toes, or especially in corporate settings, right? Like I don't want to wear leggings in front of my coworkers. But the thing is, everybody's thinking the same thing. So nobody's looking at you because they're all worried about what they look like. And I really do think it's the structure and the container, and the fact that it's conventionally executed in a situation where we can't talk and we can look at each other, but we can't connect. And so we're all in our own little Shakespeare plays and looking for our own little audience, and we're not in the same story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess my next question for you is, what role does play, right? Because you mentioned play, and I think that's such an important word. What role does play have in really deepening belonging within workplace teams?
Yeah, so I love this question. The deeper I get into drunk yoga, the more I realize that the magic ingredient is playfulness, right? Wine helps, right? It's seasoned and it's a little liquid courage so that we can open up this amazing Pandora box of play. Play is crucial to any learning and deepening a sense of camaraderie. On the most basic level, it boosts creativity and reduces stress. So playfulness optimizes our problem-solving skills. I love to reference an article when people ask me this from the Washington Post. Peter Gray, a psychology professor at Boston College, said, play primarily evolved to teach children all kinds of skills, right? And its extension into adulthood may have helped to build cooperation and sharing among hunter-gatherers way back when, beyond the level that would naturally exist in a dominance-seeking species like good old humans. In other words, for our earliest ancestors, play wasn't just about adding fun to their lives. It may actually have been a way of keeping the peace, which was obviously crucial for survival. And most of us know now that at work, play has been found to increase the speed of honing new concepts, enhances productivity, and increases job satisfaction because play is fun and it makes us happy. So it's a no-brainer. But what a lot of leaders don't know and they don't think about is that play also enhances bonding and communication. So to your point, as a result of the simple process of giving your team an opportunity to go through an experience together, have a shared story or journey that has nothing to do with job pressure. So they empathize as people and not coworkers. And to my earlier point about the fourth wall, Intelligent employees can't wholeheartedly follow any rule until each individual community member feels accountable for their own experience.
Mm.
And that
And Eli, say that you can't just run through that and leave us hanging.
right.
You have to repeat that again. Say that again. Yeah.
For the people in the back, intelligent employees can't wholeheartedly follow any rule anyone tells them to do until each individual community member feels accountable for their own experience, right? Mm-hmm. And I also want to mention accountability is the opposite of entitlement, right? And so if they don't feel accountable for their own experience and given the opportunity to say yes to this and no to this, they're going to feel entitled to have someone else shape their joy for them, which is never a recipe for good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can't have a sense of accountability in a workplace until individuals are given the opportunity to choose that experience for themselves. So in my opinion, not fact, but based on research of drunk yoga in corporate workplaces, right. Workplace leaders should be mandating time for interactive play. And I want to say this is not forced fun. There's a difference. I think employees are over the whole trust fall craze and forced cheesy fun at team building events, but rather facilitate structures in which their people can be free to engage with one another in a lighthearted way. So to think outside the box, and this helps them create new ways of doing and being together. And I want to give a couple of examples because I know this is a little bit esoteric. So a couple of ways we offer this for companies through drunk yoga, right? Building structures rather than forcing fun are we customize yoga drinking games for each group. For example, if you spill your coffee or your wine on your mat, you have to give your neighbor a compliment or high five your boss. If you mix up your left and your right, you have to say something you're grateful for or make up a dance move. And by creating these rules, we build the structure for interactive play rather than forced fun. And we level the playing field. So for teams who might otherwise feel too intimidated to try yoga in front of their coworkers, we create a playful, low stakes environment. So we break down the fourth wall between yoga mats, and interns are dancing and cheersing right next to the executives of the company, which is great for in-person gatherings, but also works well to solve isolation issues related to remote workers.
Yeah, that was a question I was going to ask. Now that we're in this remote world, how does drunk yoga work? And does it work virtually? Does it still have that same impact?
To my delight, it does. It was an experiment bringing this experience that was designed for interaction and belonging onto Zoom. But we've found cool ways to do it. Like anything else, Zoom has its own tools and techniques. So we've leaned into them rather than pretended they weren't there, much as the philosophy of drunk yoga, and we just sort of call it out. So we utilize sharing screen and sharing music and muting and unmuting, and we lean into the awkward moments of when your pet walks along the laptop, right? And so one of our drinking games might be if your pet walks across your laptop, you have to introduce them in the voice that you think your pet speaks in. It's so silly. It's so silly.
I'm so interested.
Well, when I say we help you get over yourself, I really mean it. And another way that companies have leaned on drunk yoga in the pandemic is they hire us to create like cheeky themed beginner yoga videos, like pre-recorded. And then they've interjected them, these big companies doing international remote learning, they interject them into the modules so that after 4 hours of like learning how to be a salesperson for a big bank, you can suddenly see one of my drunk yoga teachers pop up on the screen and you're dancing with coffee. So that's that.
Awesome. I love that. To your point, it's not forced play, right? It's built in, and people are excited, right? And people are able to also break down that wall. So that's really exciting to hear. My last question for you though is, if you're having, a hectic or emotionally draining day, what practices or tips do you have to ensure that you're bringing your most engaging and authentic self to your speaking engagements and or yoga practice?
This is another good question, Netta. I think that my answer echoes what I talked about earlier, getting out of a conventional space to see a new perspective. So
Right.
I'll break it down because I know that's still esoteric, but I believe our containers inform our perspectives, and our perspectives inform the stories that we tell about our present moments. So where we are informs how we think about where we are, and that informs the stories that sort of seep into our relationships. So if I'm feeling anxious or overwhelmed, my practice is that I don't force work or fun. I get out of my space. It sounds cliche, but I go for a walk, I take a bath, I go work at a cafe. I have the luxury of working for myself. So if I feel like I need to take an afternoon off to meditate or exercise or breathe or go in nature to reset my mindset, for example, if I'm nervous before delivering a talk or a workshop, I do. And it's important to remember for our listeners that in the spirit of breaking rules, that just because the rules say that you should sit upright at a computer from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. doesn't mean it's the happiest, most productive way to be.
Yeah.
Being able to show up as our best selves for ourselves and others comes down to our ability to recognize how we're interconnected and with what qualities we're bringing to that intersection, right? Because belonging lives at the intersection of personal storytelling and communal storytelling. So how are we showing up? And how we can only show up in the present, right? Like we can only show up in the present. We can't show up in the past or the future. And the best tool I use to restructure my present experience in a more authentic, to use your word, and more joyful way is to restructure my physical circumstances, get a fresh new perspective on where I am in time and space, quite practically, so that I can have a healthier relationship with where I'm going.
I love that. Yeah.
Think of it not a like spontaneity. That's the best practice we can have, I think, in our day to day. Otherwise, it does feel a little forced. So if you just sort of give yourself some time to feel like, you know what, I'm going to take this laptop and work by the river today, even if the spontaneity is just with yourself in your remote situation. It helps foster that sense of productive play and creativity. It's a stress buster, and it helps, at least me, reframe when I think, I have to do something, which feels heavy and rule bearing, rather than all the ways that we can think how lucky we are to get to do the things that we do from a place of joy and curiosity.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I do feel at times when we're in those situations, we kind of overthink it. Right? We overthink it. Well, this weekend, here's what I'm going to do for myself, as opposed to in this very moment, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to step away from this laptop. I'm going to go outside and I'm going to get some fresh air. And I'm going to take an hour or two doing that as well. And so really just kind of centering, ourselves is really important. I love, and you're spot on with what you've said. Thank you so much for gracing us with such incredible gems. Really excited to see your organization expand and share it with as many people as I can as well. So again, thank you for being a guest today. And to all professionals of color, connect with us on ourdipper.com right now by signing up and completing your profile on ourdipper.com so that we can unpack all the gems our guest dropped today. Also, be sure to rate and review all companies that you've worked for on ourdipper.com. Log in, share your voice, and find your space. Thank you for joining, and we hope to see you on Our Dipper today. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.